Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this forum, Minnesota Legislative Forum, that's being provided to you by the League of Women Voters of the Red River Valley. My name is Frank Kratke, and I will be the moderator for this forum. I'm a member of the League, and I'm also a resident of here in Moorhead. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the Minnesota State Community and Technical College for providing these wonderful facilities to us this morning. And I'd also like to mention to you that this forum is being streamed live and is also going to be broadcast on Moorhead Cable Channel 12 by the Moorhead Community Access Group. And you can refer to the MCAM website for the times that it will be broadcast for if your friends and neighbors want to see it again. First of all, I'd like to introduce and thank our legislative panel this morning that's with us, Senator Ken Eakin, Representative Ben Lean, and Representative Paul Marquardt. We thank them very much for making their time available to us. And we will follow this format this morning. We will have opening comments by each of our representatives and senator. And following that, we would accept questions from you, the audience and participants, to be asked, and at which time each of our representatives will be able to answer with a 2-minute answer. And then at the end, we'll have a little small short wrap-up of comments that they would like to make to us, also of 2 minutes each. So without further ado, I would like to have our panel start by introducing themselves again, and everybody knows you, of course, but some words of comment from this legislative session. So shall we start with you, Senator?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, thank you, and thank you for showing up today. It's a great crowd, and I'm glad to see the level of interest and engagement in the process. We're at a very critical stage in the process right now. We are in the process of putting together the 2-year budget. And we have the finance committees are starting to meet around the clock now. I serve on the Health and Human Services Finance Committee as well as on the Higher Education Finance Committee. And so we're meeting day and night trying to put together that 2-year budget. We've been given targets, and what that means is that the leadership has given each of the finance committees so much money to work with. And we have to decide how that money is going to be appropriated. And the budget targets, look pretty good in the area of education. And as I said, I serve on higher education. A significant amount of reinvestment in higher education, which is so vitally important to the people of our state and the people of this district in particular. I'm looking forward to that process. One area that I serve on the higher education finance, or the Health and Human Services Finance Committee as well. That's one area where I have some concerns. The targets came in rather low. I've been pushing to try to increase those targets. Health and Human Services is one area that's really taken some hits over the last several years. It's been the one area that's been cut the deepest. And I've told this story about, I saw a program once on the Dust Bowl, and there was a person that told a joke. It was a story about a farmer who got lost in one of these dust bowls during during one of those dust storms, and he was trying to find his way, and all he could see was a fence line. It was just the very top part of the fence. It was a barbed wire fence, and the top wire was just barely above the dirt. The dirt had piled up that high, and so he was following this fence line, and eventually the oh, did I run out of time? So I can't tell the rest of the story. So
I think that was the cowbell or something that was.
Yeah, tell the rest. Okay, I'll tell the rest. But anyway, that barbed wire, the barbed wire disappears underneath the dirt. So you realize the dirt is higher than the fence line, but he sees a cowboy hat off in the distance. So he walks over and he picks up the cowboy hat, and here there was a cowboy under there, up to his head in dirt. And he looks down at the cowboy and he says, could you use some help? And the cowboy said, no, I'm okay, but the horse I'm riding could use some help. And the reason I tell that story is that's Health and Human Services. They have been buried under cuts over the last 10 years that is very severe. and really need some help. And that Health and Human Services budget goes towards our nursing homes, long-term care for seniors and people with disabilities. We really need to do something in that area. So thank you. Thanks for letting me tell the story.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ben Lean.
Thank you, Frank, for moderating today, and I'd also like to thank the League and M-State for hosting us today, and everybody for getting up early on a Saturday and coming out to hear us and have this discussion with us. It's much appreciated. I've been working pretty steadily this session on some border city bills. We have a couple to make an appropriation for an existing program and try to improve on it as we can. And for a second border city program that has to deal more specifically with tax credits for businesses, really trying to improve on that, making it more competitive with North Dakota, trying to index it. And I had a hearing in the House Tax Committee on Thursday for that bill, and it had a pretty good response, so I'm feeling pretty positive about that. I'm also carrying a pretty big bill this year. It's for the reformulation of the local government aid program. And this bill has overwhelming support from different city groups across the state. All these groups were very involved with writing the bill and the formulation process, so that seems to have some real traction, some real good response. And as Senator Eakin said, Health and Human Services is certainly a major concern a lot of folks are having also in the House. And I spoke with Representative Tom Huntley this week. He's the chair of Health and Human Service Finance Committee in the House, and he had said, at least in his bill, he's going to try to still put in an appropriation increase for the long-term care for the nursing home facilities. So that was something very positive to hear on that matter. And yeah, I appreciate you all for coming out today.
Thank you. And Representative Paul Marquardt.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to the sponsors for hosting this, for everyone for coming out. As Senator Eakin and Representative Lean has mentioned, we are in a crucial portion right now of the budget. It's actually the fun part of the year, and this is the time when we actually start rolling out the budget bills that really indicate what our priorities are as the majority parties right now. I mean, that's part of the process. And what that is to balance the budget in a straight up, honest way without one-time shifts or gimmicks or anything else that doesn't really truly balance the budget into the future. So we're going to do that. And then what's really exciting is significant investment in property tax relief and education, and we're going to make sure that we take care of our most vulnerable citizens. But this week, the property tax relief bill came out, and there's going to be about $250 million of property tax relief. And what it probably does more than anything is send out a very strong message that we're not going to balance the budget on the backs of our property taxpayers, our senior citizens on fixed incomes, and our families and our farmers and our small businesses. And some of the parts in that is a kind of a new homestead credit state refund, where if your property taxes are high in comparison to your income, you get a direct benefit. And another area in there is increased local government aid and increased county program aid, which is going to be significant to our cities and our counties to help keep property taxes down and services up. And I have to say, Representative Lean here is just a freshman. And yet in that property tax bill, and he's the vice chair of that committee, he is the author of that local government aid bill. And there's not many times where there's a freshman that I have seen in all my years with such significant legislation. And that he's been a champion for that, and that right now there's $60 million in that bill. So I think things look good. The bell is, the ring, round one is done, and we're ready to go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your opening statements. Now, we'll start. Diane has just handed me a couple of questions, and we'll start the question and answer as soon as I get them organized and have a chance to kind of look at what we're saying here. First question is, how important are community colleges in training Minnesotans' workforce, and how do you think we should increase the awareness about these facilities or these opportunities? Do you want to start with that one, Paul?
Well, it's very crucial, and it's part of the system in which we are going to get to the world's best workforce, which is crucial. We start, and the education bill is going to come out on Tuesday. And we're going to start with early education, where we know the results are there, all the way align it with higher ed. And that's why the technical and community colleges are extremely important. High schools get to folks, students, career and college ready. And it's crucial that we are putting out top-notch students and we have a top-notch education. Tom Stenson, our chief economist, says that in the next decade, because of all the baby boomers retiring, is that our workforce growth is almost going to come to a screeching halt. There will be no workforce growth in the next decade, which means if we are going to increase our productivity in this state, we have to have even a better and more talented, trained workforce. And, you know, we're a cold weather state, and yet Minnesota has always led the nation or been a top leader in bringing in jobs and having a strong economic climate. And the reason has always been, and we know this, has been education. That's the one thread that has led to the strong economy that we have. Colleges, higher ed play a very, very important part. So we have to make sure that we keep that affordable, accessible, and we have to make sure we invest in these facilities. And former Senator Langseth is sitting over there, and he understood the importance of that. And we've made those commitments over the years. So it's crucial if we're going to have an economy that is going to be world class. It's going to depend very much, almost solely, on the workforce we put out there, and our educational system will determine that.
Okay, Representative Lean, you want to address that also?
Yeah, thank you. No, I absolutely agree that community colleges and the tech schools are a very instrumental piece of the puzzle when it comes to education. And something I really appreciate in the E12 bill is more focus at an earlier age on getting kids not just ready for college, but ready for the workforce. Understanding what their interests, what their skills are, and then also helping kids to understand what do I have to do to go about getting into this field. And really, what is the type of salary, what is the wage I can expect, because, you know, I need to know how, after I go to school, how I'm gonna then be able to pay the debts, and if I am gonna be able to pay the debts. And so the community colleges, it's just as important to me as the 4-year, because for those students who have those skills that are much more refined and you know, would benefit much more in those types of industries, they need that training available. They need those resources available. And I do have a bonding bill to appropriate $5.6 million for the or for improvements to the diesel mechanic program here on campus. So that's something I'm really working on, and you know, something I really do value.
Senator Aiken?
Thank you. And yeah, and I'm also carrying that bill over in the Senate side, the bonding bill for M-State here. And I believe that the community college are a very essential part of our higher education system, as Representative Lean said, just as important as the 4-year institutions. And I know firsthand, my wife was a graduate from here at M-State in Moorhead. I've taught over at M-State and Detroit Lakes. Education, as Representative Marquardt said, it's the key component to establishing a high quality of life here in Minnesota. And without it, we will not have that high quality of life that we've come to enjoy. And unfortunately, there's been a great deal of disinvestment in our higher education system generally. And I think, unfortunately, there's been kind of a push, you know, more towards trying to get everybody to go to, and I shouldn't say everybody, but there's more of a push for the 4-year colleges, which is vitally important. But there's a very important role that our 2-year institutions play, and we need to have a diverse system that makes sure that everybody's being educated to their full potential in order to ensure that we have the best workforce in the nation. And we've been known for that in this state. We want to continue to be on the leading edge of higher education and education generally. We need to work to make sure that our education system is a seamless system, all the way from early childhood all the way through higher education. And we've been working hard at that to make sure that those transitions are as seamless as possible and are as smooth as possible for students. Representative Lean mentioned the importance of making sure that students are given the right guidance so that when they're going from high school into higher education, they're going into areas that they're interested in, that they're going to excel in, and that there's jobs for. That's vitally important as well. And I'm also carrying a bill for an internship program that would incentivize businesses by providing a tax credit for them to take on interns from the colleges, both 2-year and 4-year, in the hopes that that will eventually lead to full-time employment for those students and will keep those students here. That's one of the problems we've experienced in this area, is a loss of our young people. And so we want to make sure that our young people are being provided with good jobs in this area, and if we can incentivize these businesses to take on these internships, I think it could lead to a lot more employment of our young people here.
I'm just going to throw in a follow-up question here, since I'm involved in education myself and see some of the numbers that students are dealing with as far as finances to get into education. I guess just a short follow-up by each of you as to what you think the legislature, our legislature, can do to make any form of higher education more accessible financially. Is there something that that we're doing that can either to control these costs, because they just seem to be running wild right now as to compared to when we were going through school? You want to comment, anyone, on that?
Sure. And should I just start off again? As far as the 2-year institutions, you know, there used to be a time when they were free to go to, and they were actually under the jurisdiction of the K-12 system. And now that's quite a dramatic change, and that wasn't all that long ago when you think about it. And college tuition has generally increased very substantially in the last 10 years. You go back a little over a decade ago, the cost of a college education, about 2/3 of it was borne by the state of educating at our public universities and colleges, and 1/3 was borne by the student and their families. That now has completely flipped. Now the students are actually picking up 2/3 of the cost, and the state's only picking up 1/3. I've even asked the question, at what point do you stop calling it a public institution, because it's being privately financed now, basically with public subsidies. And we need to get back to a system where the state is not abdicating its responsibilities. It is a state investment, a good for the public that we're investing in when we put money into higher education. And so the budget that the governor's come out with and the budget that we have in the Senate is basically the same. It would call for another $80 million of increased funding for the University of Minnesota, another $80 million for the MnSCU system, another $80 million for the grant program, which goes to all students, regardless of, based on need, regardless of what college they attend. And so I think there's a significant amount of reinvestment being made. It still doesn't get us back to the level that we were before, but it certainly sets us on the road and on the path towards a better, stronger, more affordable, more accessible higher education system, and make sure that we're giving all of our students the opportunity to develop to their fullest potential. So.
Well, Senator Eakin talked about the financial side of accessibility. Let me talk about another one, and that's opportunity. If you look at your students of color and students of poverty in this state, the graduation rates are only about 1/2 of white students. So there's a huge loss of opportunity, and it's going to be crucial in this state that we close that achievement gap, because that is going to result in a lost economic activity into the future. And the second way in which you can at least decrease costs is making sure that when our students leave high school, they're prepared for college or a career. Right now, 40% of the graduates that go on to a MnSCU university have to take remedial classes at expense, cost, and loss of time. So we have to do a better job of alignment there. Also with concurrent enrollment in PSEO, there are some schools in this state that students are leaving high school with an associate 2-year degree. And so let's do as much free as we can within the K through or E through 12 system before you even get on to post-secondary.
I sit on the Higher Education Finance and Policy Committee in the House, and this year the entire focus has been on tuition relief. We have heard 2 bills this year in committee, which is significantly lower than any other committee I'm on. But the time we have been spending in the committee has been really digging into the MnSCU budget and the U of M budget, taking a look at in the last 5-10 years, in light of the problems at the state level with the state deficit, what have these institutions been doing with their funding, and if we're going to continue to increase funding for new programs, how are they going to be able to use that? How is it going to most effectively educate students at a real value? And so I think the ultimate bill that comes out of the Higher Ed Committee this year is going to be, number one, focused on tuition relief. And we've been taking a look at different programs, different ways we can lower tuition for students. But I think, too, also what's going to come out of the bill is tuition relief for as many students as possible versus taking a look at pockets of students here, pockets of students there, how can we help them, really taking an overall approach to contain the cost of tuition and make school more affordable and more accessible for students.
Thank you. And on this, we seem to be on the same subject here again a little bit. This questioner would like to know whether you support the DREAM Act to allow an undeserved population of young people the opportunity to succeed and build a better future for Minnesota. And I think some of you have spoken to that a little bit. I think, Paul, do you want to lead with that one? DREAM Act?
I have not seen that bill. So
All right.
I really don't know all what's in that bill this year. I'm aware of past efforts, and I'd have to look at it before I'd know. There's some concerns I have.
Okay. Anybody else would like to comment? Senator Eakin or Representative Benleen?
I mentioned we've heard 2 bills in committee this year, and the DREAM Act was actually the second bill we heard. We heard testimony from individuals on Wednesday on the bill, and we're going to continue to have a hearing on the bill on Monday, so we're going to continue with those. And we haven't been able to ask questions yet. It's a relatively new bill this year in the sense that it was just introduced recently. We're just hearing about it recently, so I too have some concerns about it. I would like to know how it's going to comply with programs on the federal level. I also want to know how it's going to work out with folks getting their citizenship, how some of those things are going to play out. So we're going to have an opportunity on Monday in the committee to have more discussion about that, and I certainly do look forward to that.
Well, and I just thought I'd mention that we also heard the DREAM Act bill in the Higher Ed Committee, and it did move out of that committee and is moving to the floor. And there were some very compelling arguments that were made as to why we should be ensuring that, again, all the children in Minnesota should be provided, all the young people provided with an opportunity to get a good quality education. And that's what one of the things this bill is designed to do. So I do think that it's something that we need to look into, to do something to make sure that these students are again given an opportunity to get a good quality education. They will contribute so much more back to this state. So we shouldn't, in my view, we shouldn't be turning our backs on any of the young people in this state. If we do, I think it's going to be to our long-term costs. It's really going to cost us in the long term. And we want to be, again, a state that's known for providing all of our young people with the opportunity to develop to their fullest potential.
Okay. Mentioned the issue previously about workers shortage and the need to bring skills up to the right level. And I guess this questioner would like to know, on the short term, could short-term training play an important role in closing the skills gap? And their opinion is that maybe not everything needs to be for educational credit, but how would we fund that skill enhancement, if you will? Do you want to start that one over there, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge issue. The governor's workforce council says that by 2018, 70% of all the jobs in Minnesota are going to require some post-secondary education or certificate. And at the current rate where we're at, we're going to be about 150,000 jobs short of that, which is the skills gap, as you just mentioned. And when you put that potential skills gap into perspective, 150,000 jobs, that's the number of jobs Minnesota lost during this Great Recession that we've just gained back. So it's very, very significant. How you do that? First of all, I think you step up the E through 12 education system. And what's crucial is we have to align that. We have to make sure that students that are coming out of our schools, high schools, are career and college ready. That's going to solve a lot of the problem. And then we make sure that our high schools are aligned with our post-secondary institutions. Right now they're not. But for the first time actually in the history of the state, you've got the education commissioner with the higher ed office person and the MnSCU chancellor working together to have an alignment process. And so when you come out of high school, you're ready. We're working on a new assessment system in the K through 12 bill that isn't just going to have a cut score. We're going to eliminate the grad test. That's just a cut score, which quite frankly hasn't been working. When you've got an achievement gap as wide as the Mississippi River, and 40% of your kids coming out of school that have to take remedial classes, the current system is not working. So what we do is have an assessment system that measures kids along the way, and if they slip down, you build them back up, and then you align them. But there isn't this final cutoff score. We're actually doing something that isn't just feel good, but actually is going to work into the future. So I think that's really important that you align, you make sure you do a lot of this in K through 12, and some of the other folks might be able to talk more about training, which is certainly a part. But
Okay. Ben?
I certainly do think that we do need to have more programs, more training opportunities for folks to move up, to get higher degrees or higher certificates and higher licensure, and as a result, a higher salary. I know the governor made a pretty big commitment to job training and workforce training through his initial budget request. And a part of that was significant dollars for the Minnesota Investment Fund, which would be money for employers to go out excuse me, and to hire new employees. And along with that would come the training and everything with that. Also, I know Representative Mahoney, chair of the Jobs Committee, he has moved his omnibus bill out of the floor, so I'm certainly anxious to look at that and to also see what type of job training programs are in his bill as well.
And I already mentioned earlier about the internship bill that I'm carrying, and I think that that would go, a long way. It certainly helps out in providing the training as well as providing employment opportunities eventually, and that's the hopes of that bill. It provides a tax credit, again, to businesses that do hire on these interns from the colleges in the area. And it helps the students. It's for the businesses so that it buys down some of the pay that they're providing for that student. So that student can use that pay then for paying down their tuition. So it's a win-win for both in this situation. And that would require some additional investment, of course, but again, it's an investment that's going to pay off in the long run, especially for our area. I thought I'd mention that bill does only apply to Greater Minnesota, and I'm referring to it as the 11-county metro area now because the metro area really now is expanding. They're growing by leaps and bounds in that area of the state. It used to be 7 counties, but now there's other counties that really are becoming a part of that metropolitan area, and so they're growing. They don't need the assistance there like we do out here to find employment and to keep our young people out here in our communities. So that's the reason that it only applies to our area of the state. But we definitely need to be doing more in regard to training. That's what in the 2-year colleges play the most important role in that regard. A lot of adults are going back to school. There's a lot more part-time students. I also carried a bill that would have provided more assistance for part-time students because there are getting to be more and more part-time students all the time. People who have to work, and not part-time by choice, part-time because of necessity, because they have families to take care of and they have jobs that they're working, and so they need that additional assistance. In the grant program, the way it had been working, there were a number of part-time students who were working very hard that were not getting the same amount of grant and aid per credit as full-time students or even part-time students who weren't working. And so we're trying to address that inequity as we move forward. And again, in order to ensure that everybody has that opportunity. And Representative Marquardt was talking about the worker shortage that's going to be happening. We need to provide more education for more people than we ever have before if we were going to just maintain the same level of productivity that we've enjoyed in the past, because we are losing workers by the thousands as the baby boom generation are now leaving the workforce, and we don't have the workers necessary to make up for that loss. So we need to educate, and we need to work smarter and more productively in order to maintain that quality of life and that standard of living.
Okay, thank you. We are definitely sparking a lot of interest in this issue of education today. Here's a personal testimony that really is asking, the question that they're asking in this testimony is there any future funding going to high schools? And their comment is, being a recent graduate of Moorhead High, I can say that it was not the norm to have college credit after graduating. In fact, what I have heard and observed is that my fellow classmates didn't get the preparation they were supposed to get. When I was there, classes were cut and really good teachers were being let go. So back again, what is the future for high school funding for high schools?
I guess really it should be Representative Marquardt is
Okay.
the chair.
And you're the chair
He's
of
the
that?
chair of the K-12
So
Education Committee
you
in the
can
House, which has
right.
jurisdiction, by the way, of over 40% of the state budget. So that's
Okay, you're on, Paul.
So I get 40% of the time. No, no, it won't take it. Well, we're going to put the bill out on Tuesday, and we have goals in this bill, and the goal is to put kids on the path to the world's best workforce. And in there, we are going to put 4 main goals that we are going to strive to get to, which means to completely close the achievement gap by 2027, because in the bill, we are going to fund, for the first time in the history of the state, all-day, everyday kindergarten. We're going to finally fund that. We know it works, we know the results, and we're going to finally get that done. And so those kids will start in 2014, they'll graduate in 2027. Our goal is to close the achievement gap. We'll have every kid graduate by 2027. Third grade literacy, 100% by 2027, have 100% of our kids ready for a career in college by 2027. That is the goal. And so what we're going to do is invest in those things that we know work. Early childhood education, all-day, everyday kindergarten, and then give schools the resources to be able, all the way through high school, through 12th grade, to keep them aligned. We're going to have a new assessment system that isn't just going to basically measure kids at the end. We're going to take them all the way through, and if they slip, we get them back on. Absolutely, failure is not an option. We're going to get them all the way here. And the final component of that, and we're going to have the resources to do that, but you can put all the resources in there that you want. We're going to have a new accountability system that's going to require schools to come up with a educational and budget plan that tells how they're going to progress towards those goals. We are going to have 9 centers of excellence through the Minnesota Department of Education that's going to work with schools, and if they see schools not making it towards, they're going to step in, coach them, help them through. And ultimately, if they're not making things, the Department of Education has to come in and do some more. So it's not enough just to put money into a system. We're not just plopping money on a formula. We're going to make sure that actually that every single dime that goes into that bill is going to go towards efforts and strategies that have a proven track record of increasing student achievement and closing the achievement gap. So I think that's going to make a huge difference in people's lives, in students' lives, and into the future by closing that achievement gap. Look, the senator got a story. Can I give one really compelling statistic here? And he also had one table where he and Senator Lee and I had to share 2 tables. And when he came here earlier today, he said the champagne tasted so good. We just have water in our glasses. But anyway, let me give you one stat. There was a Stanford University professor, and this now has been replicated by a Federal Reserve Bank economist, Rob Grunwald in Minnesota, who said if we had closed the achievement gap back 15 years ago, this is the United States, that we would have an increased productivity of our GDP of $1.3 trillion in this nation. And to put that in perspective, the Great Recession was a loss of $1 trillion. So the achievement gap, lost productivity, is actually like us having a recession on our back. And Rob Grunwald transferred that to Minnesota to about a 2.8% loss in GDP. That's $8 billion a year. Now, GDP, I think, is total, like, goods and services. That would be like $8 building 8 new Viking stadiums every year. That's what the achievement gap is costing us in the state of Minnesota. So we've got to get there. So thank you for your patience. That's it for education for me then.
Yeah, well, and I guess just in response to the question as well, one thing, and Representative Marquardt was talking about the forward-looking nature of the reforms that are being put in place. I think, unfortunately, with the No Child Left Behind Act, or the NCLB mandates, as I like to call them, which are really unfunded mandates because the federal government wasn't funding them, and it is basically just relied very heavily on testing, not on funding. And it tended to be punitive, which means that it was backwards looking. If a school wasn't performing up to the certain standards or mandates, they would then punish that school, which really didn't help that school do better. And I think that carrots work much better than sticks. And in this case, this is forward-looking. It's money being put into schools if they start pursuing more productive, more efficient, more effective ways of educating children. So it's steering the schools in the right direction. And that's the way I think that we really find efficiencies, that we really find the most effective way to achieve our goals. And I think I just wanted to mention, too, as far as the testing, we're not going to test our way to an excellent education system. Testing is a part of it, but I think sometimes we rely too heavily on that, and testing can actually have a detrimental effect if we place too much emphasis on it to where it becomes the end instead of just a means to an end. And I feel sometimes like we've gotten to that point where it's actually become a hindrance, and if you have teachers that are teaching to the test, that's not always the best way to educate our children. We need to make sure that we're listening to teachers and people in the classrooms because they're the experts. I always have problems with the state or the government getting too involved in micromanaging the schools because the people that are writing the laws are not the experts oftentimes on education, and we need to rely on the experts in the classroom to know what works and what doesn't work. And putting more mandates and more testing, that sometimes can, again, have a detrimental effect. So we need to be very careful in how we're progressing. And all day, everyday kindergarten, Paul had already mentioned that. Reaching kids when they're young is vitally important. I always point to what happened in California. In California, they measure their future prison needs based on how many students are reading or are up to speed by 3rd grade. And they believe that when you get beyond that, it gets harder and harder to get students onto the right path. So we need to reach those kids early, and that's why all day, everyday kindergarten, I think, is vitally important as well.
I have just a quick,
I guess I was just going to speak briefly. I certainly do appreciate the testimony, and it all the more makes me very pleased to see that we have a straightforward budget, and both parties are guilty of the school shifts over the last 10 years, so I'm very pleased to see that we have a straightforward budget and that we're putting significant investment into E12 education. I mean, you heard from Representative Marquardt and Senator Eakin how vitally, crucially important this is, and I can't back that up even more. And I'm also very pleased to see that along with the funding comes new formulas and new ways to measure schools and to measure students, and seeing the elimination of the grad testing and more focus on that SWEET assessment to really track kids, to really understand where kids are going, and to help them along the way when they do fall off a little bit. So very pleased to see those improvements.
as a component of this whole discussion and the system and so forth, question I want to know where the legislation on Minnesota State teacher licensing exams is right now. What is the standing on that issue? You mentioned the experts in the classroom, so.
Yeah, well, right now in the House, the Minnesota Teacher License Exam is that new exam that was put in just a year or so ago that require it just, and there really wasn't, we found out a great reason to put that in. It's kind of a battery of tests. And what happens, for example, it's a college level math test for maybe elementary teachers. And what you have, and you can talk to almost every superintendent, it's really a rural issue, is that you have teachers that are in the classroom but have not passed one or part of this test. And so the state has granted some waivers, and the superintendents and principals are saying these are wonderful teachers, they're connecting and motivating with our kids, but they can't pass this test, which means they won't get the license. And we know as a teacher, you can know all the facts in the world, but if you can't connect and motivate kids, you're not going to be an effective teacher. So what we're doing in the bill right now is we create a waiver for one more year. If you can't pass it, we'll give you a waiver. And then we've established a task force to take a look at that and say, hey, how do you really measure tests? And this is on top of everything else that teachers are doing. And this was added just a year or so ago. When we questioned folks about that in committee this year, there was no real rationale, other than people thought we should take higher level tests. And so I would say that those MTLEs, as they're called, are going to be eliminated, and they'll be replaced with something else by next year.
And I too, in the Senate side, I know Senator Stumpf is carrying a bill on the MTLE to eliminate that test, which has proven to be extremely onerous and burdensome and not accurately measure the quality of the teacher. And that's the main problem there. It's not really a good measurement. It's again, it gets back to the problem I mentioned before about testing. It's being written by people who really aren't the experts and don't understand how to measure that good quality teaching. And good quality teaching is very difficult to measure on a paper and pen test, and hard to measure, and because so much of teaching is about inspiring students, is about turning them on to learning. And I'm a teacher myself. I've taught high school for a number of years, and I always felt that my main job was really to develop a desire to learn, a thirst for knowledge, an intellectual curiosity in my students. So that when they leave the classroom, that's not the end of their educational experience. It's just the beginning. And that's so hard to measure. One of the things about the MTLE test as well, it measures the knowledge of an issue fairly well, but it doesn't measure at all how to impart that knowledge to the students. And you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't know how to transfer that knowledge to your students, it doesn't mean anything. And that requires that you be able to connect with those students. So pedagogy is so important. And again, the education system is so important to our quality of life, and the most important thing to our education system is having good teachers in the classroom. I believe the current MTLE exams have been chasing some good teachers out of the classroom and making it difficult for them to get the credentials they need to teach. And I've heard it not just from teachers, this is from administrators who are saying, we've got some excellent teachers here. These tests are blocking their way into the classroom. We need these good teachers, and that's why we're doing something about it.
Well, I've received several emails from students coming out of college, MSU, and other area schools who are saying, you know, I had 3.5 GPA, I excelled through school, and now I'm getting to this MTLE testing, and I'm continuing to have roadblocks. I've taken it twice, I've taken it 3 times, and I just can't get through it. And so I really do think this is a mechanism that is holding qualified folks back from the classroom, and especially when I consider that these are people that have that desire, that want to get into the classroom. They want to be educating these kids and really helping these kids out. And if we have this roadblock that's preventing that, you know, we certainly do need to address that. And so I appreciate Representative Marquardt's work to address that and to come up with a new mechanism to assess teachers, make sure they're qualified, but then also to allow them to excel into the classroom and to reach these students.
Okay, I think we're going to change our subject line here a little bit because I think we've covered that very thoroughly. Questions regarding another group of folks that we need to be aware of, and that is the homeless ones. Questions revolving around what do you think is the best investment for helping to eliminate homelessness? And another comment here from a local standpoint on the same subject. Our local homeless shelter in Moorhead had over 40 children residing there just this last week. Number of homeless families is rising sharply. Families and individuals have significant barriers such as disabilities. What can be done to provide services to these family groups specifically, and what kind of financial or supporting mechanisms can be provided? So would you like to lead with that, Kent?
Sure, thank you. And this is one of my concerns with the Health and Human Services budget, is to make sure that that's large enough to ensure that we can provide services for those homeless, and as has been mentioned, the high number of children that are homeless. And I don't, I don't care what people think about why the adults might be homeless, but nobody can blame the children for being homeless. And these children need to have a stable, healthy, secure environment in order to thrive. And again, that's an investment in our society and in our future. If we invest in these people and in these children in particular, they will become very productive. They will achieve their goals in life and their dreams, and we should, again, give every child that opportunity. I really want Minnesota to be a true land of opportunity where every child has that ability to thrive and to prosper and to develop, again, to their fullest potential. And homelessness is such a roadblock to that, that I do think it's a critical issue that we need to focus on, and I think it's even more critical here in the Moorhead area. We've had some real issues with homelessness and with children in particular, but homelessness generally, and so we do need to increase investments in that area to provide that stability and to ensure that all of these people have that ability or that opportunity. I'd mentioned the DREAM Act earlier too, and one of the compelling arguments there again was the same thing about making sure that those children have an opportunity to develop. And we are going to need to have, again, because of the worker shortage and because of the loss of people in the workforce, we're going to have to work harder to make sure that every person in our society that enters that workforce is working the most productively they can, and addressing the homeless issue will go a long way in that direction. But generally, again, my concern about homelessness and about the funding for health and human services generally, sometimes these are the most vulnerable, least powerful people in our society. And I think that's one of the reasons that we often see the cuts being made there most severely. They don't have organized lobbyists down there in St. Paul, high-paid lobbyists who are lobbying on their behalf. And so that makes it more critical for us as citizens to speak up on their behalf. So.
Thank you. Representative Lee?
I was appointed to the asset preservation, or asset development, and financial literacy task force this session. It's the largely the same task force that Representative Lanning sat on, the Ladders Out of Poverty task force. And so, this issue, it really does speak to me. I was at a pre-campaign event out at the Fargo Dome. It was hosted by the Homeless Coalition and some organizations in the area. And just to see firsthand, how many families, and to that matter, how many children really are affected by this issue was really, it was really troubling, and it was really kind of eye-opening to then think about, okay, now I'm in a position to do something, and this is something that I really want to focus on. And I think a lot of that does have to go back to education, to make sure that we have these programs and that we have these classrooms that really can identify kids' strengths, identify kids' weakness, and be able to help kids along that track to reach those goals. And I also really think some of the job training programs that we spoke about earlier are really going to help that out significantly.
Well, that is a complex issue. I mean, one of the issues is mental health issues, and I think, as Senator Eakin said, when you're, cutting health and human services, it hits those areas, and a lot of the homeless have mental health issues. I also think affordable housing certainly has something to do with that. We have a high percent of folks who can't afford housing, or is what you call cost burden, which means they're paying over 30% of their income in housing. And I think part of it, and Senator Eakin talked about this too, is opportunity. And I think that's where, again, education is the great equalizer as far as trying to provide that opportunity. But very concerning is that I know here, just in the Fargo-Moorhead area, there is a high number of children that are homeless. And a University of Minnesota study, and I don't think anyone really needed this study, says that there's a correlation between the housing stability of a child and their academic success. And so when you have students that are very mobile or homeless, that is going to hurt chances for academic achievement and ultimately hurt our economy. So it's a multifaceted concern. There's no just one area, but also a high percent of your homeless are veterans. And so it is an issue, and the governor did, and I forget how much, but he had some specific areas that he put into housing and issues with the homeless and mental health issues. So the governor actually has made that a priority.
And somewhat related to, because we're talking families issues, this question would like to know about the Family Economic Security Act. Where is it at, I suppose, in legislation, and do you support this approach of this act?
Yeah, and that does deal with the minimum wage, and
Yes.
And there were actually 5 bills that were moving on the minimum wage, and that wasn't the specific one that has moved forward to the floor of the Senate. I did sign on to that one, but there is going to be, I believe, a minimum wage increase this year. The question is how much, and the range of all the bills was anywhere from $7.25 an hour up to $10.55 an hour was the highest one, and that wasn't the economic security one, but there was a wide range, and so we don't know where it's going to be yet, and again, it hasn't passed yet, but I'm anticipating that something will come out of it. The $7.25 would just bring it up to what the federal minimum wage is right now, because the state minimum wage is far below that at this point. But so again, it goes anywhere from just bringing it up to the federal minimum wage up to $10.55. I think something will probably happen there, but it's right now it's just sitting on the floor. It hasn't been voted on the Senate yet.
Well, I certainly do support bringing the minimum wage at least up to the federal level. I mean, that's the minimum, the least that we can do. And I really feel that we have to do that. Talking about poverty and homelessness and things, I mean, really, if we were to look at what a livable wage is, we're talking the $14 an hour area. So to be going from $7.25 at the absolute most up to 14, I think we at least have to ally ourselves with that federal level, and that's the first step. Some other bills that have been introduced would eventually kind of index the minimum wage based on inflation, so it would over time come up to that $9, $10 an hour area. So I'm certainly going to be taking a look at all these different bills that come through, and at least I think we need to get our minimum wage up to that federal level.
Like with so many bills, there's always a balancing act. How do you improve the purchasing power of folks, but also, especially when you're along the border here, to balance that with the competitive nature for businesses. So that's always a tough one. I do believe that one of the best ways in which you can create jobs in the economy is to increase the purchasing power of the consumer. And I think that's really important when we can do that. And Henry Ford used to pay his employees really well so they could buy his cars. And I do think that principle applies here. And when you really think about it, and what kind of gets me is that you have certain state legislators who won't even look at a minimum wage increase. And right now, let's say it's federal, Minnesota $6.15, federal $7.25. So for an 8-hour day, that's about $60 a day if someone was on minimum wage. And yet, us as legislators, we can qualify up to $76 a day in per diem. That's above our salary. $76 a day, tax-free, in per diem, but we're not willing, well, I am, but some are not willing to raise someone's minimum wage to $60 when I can get up to 76. I have a problem with that, and they have to pay everything out of that, where we still have our other salary. So I just think it's, if we're looking at poverty and opportunity and other things, it has to come up. How much? I think the $10 is a little too rich for me, but certainly I think a little bit over $7.25 would be good.
Just thought I'd mention that the bill, I believe in the Senate, is at 750. I think is what's moved to the floor in the Senate. So, and there was questions also about whether there should be indexing or not. That's not included in the Senate bill that's moved. So indexing so that it would increase with the cost of inflation. That's again not in the Senate side.
Okay. There are some questions here regarding energy legislation. And these two questions kind of come together, but they're somewhat in opposing form. One questioner wants to know what is being done to move Minnesota to a leadership role in energy sources and that don't require burning anything. In other words, getting us away from burning fossil fuel. Another questioner on the same subject is concerned about the omnibus energy bill, but feels maybe it's proposing some unrealistic targets for energy resources. What realistic targets are needed or being spoken about, and can you address energy as it's being talked about right now?
Very good. I
Interested?
can start. Yeah, it's certainly energy is one of those issues that there's a million different sides to it. But Minnesota a few years ago, I think, did take quite a lead when it said we're going to do 25% renewables by 2025. Very good goal. And Minnesota has also been a leader already in renewable sources. We were the first state to go and require ethanol. We were the first state to do a 2% biodiesel mandate. You know, we've had wind power and things. So I think Minnesota has been doing an awful lot. And I think what was done, how many years ago was that legislation? 7 years ago. I mean, I think that set some very high goals, and our municipals and our cooperatives and that are working very hard to get there. In my mind, let's do that one first before we pile on more mandates. And one of the new mandates right now is the solar energy one. And quite frankly, I don't know a heck of a lot about that. But I do listen to those people who are providing our energy and trying to keep costs low to our customers. And they're saying right now the solar is not cost effective. It would add a lot of great costs. And that carries a lot of weight with me. So I think in the latest bill on the energy omnibus bill, that part I think was taken out of it, at least for cooperatives. I don't know for municipals, and we've got some experts in the crowd that can. On the House side. Oh, okay. On the House side. And so I guess I would not support the bill right now with the solar mandate in it, just from what I've heard from cooperatives and municipals and those folks. Because I think we've got a pretty high standard right now in place.
Okay. Other comments? Ben, do you want to go next? Okay.
Sure. Thank you. I'm certainly an advocate for renewable energy. I think it's something, I don't really think we have a choice on the matter as far as if. To me, it's just when. And I think we do need to let some of these mandates we already have in place take effect. You know, let's not move the finish line before we get there. Let's see where we're at when we're there, see if we can make adjustments to improve that, see if we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit and bring ourselves up to that level. So I think we need, and as far as the new mandates go, I think we need to slow down a little bit and let some of these programs take effect. And I've certainly been in touch with Morehead Public Service and a lot of the other rural legislators to have these conversations about, okay, how is this going to impact the municipals? How is it going to impact the co-ops? You know, what are we ultimately getting here? And I'm certainly proud to see the city of Morehead itself take some action on the wind energy. I know there's a project out for solar energy. So, you know, I think the city of Morehead is taking those steps itself to put ourselves in place for the future.
Well, and I have, again, I want to see the renewable energy industry develop here in Minnesota. I think it'd be a great new industry for us to take a lead in, but I do think we have to be very careful when we're dealing with mandates here. And mandates are a very blunt instrument. Sometimes they don't work very effectively. Sometimes they can backfire. And we do have mandates in place, the Renewable Energy Standard that was already passed, as was stated by Representative Marquardt about, I believe, 7 years ago. And a lot of those in the energy industry have been working diligently and very hard to try to meet up to those standards. And as Representative Lean said, I don't think we should be moving the finish line on them before they've even accomplished those goals. In my view, as far as developing renewable energy here in Minnesota, is that incentives work so much better, and that we should not be relying as heavily on mandates as we do on some kind of incentives, financial incentives that would incent businesses to locate here and to develop that industry. That's much more effective and efficient in my view, and that's and I've mentioned before that I prefer using carrots over sticks, and that would be the carrot method of incentivizing renewable energy industry, but not using mandates, which is the stick, and which has been and can do real harm to our energy industry here in Minnesota. And so, again, I think that we need to be very careful. We need to be thinking about the environment. I know there are many of my colleagues in the legislature who are very, very focused in on the environmental issues, and that's good. We all want to have a good, clean environment here in Minnesota. That's an important component to our quality of life here, but we also need to have a strong, thriving economy as well. And so we need to look at both sides of that when we're moving forward. And I think sometimes there are folks that lose sight of that and may not take a comprehensive view. And if you do something, put in mandates in place. And what I've been hearing too on the solar side, I think solar power is great. But what we've been hearing from those in the industry is that it's not quite there yet as far as being able to, as far as the efficiencies are concerned. So again, we have to be concerned that we're not pushing so fast that we get out ahead of what the technology can provide at the time. And we want to make sure that we're doing things right. And if you put in mandates that fail, and that create a big backlash because you've done undue harm to the economy, that sets back the whole environmental movement too. So I've made that case to some of my friends who, again, I feel may focus at the exclusion of the economy, telling them you need to look at the economy as well. You can't look at these issues in isolation. And so we need practical, common sense solutions that I think incentivize new industries to locate here and develop here, but not doing things that will, again, harm our industry and harm our economy. And I think in the end that will harm our environment as well.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move towards some questions regarding commerce and business, and specifically taxes on commerce and business. The questioners are concerned that, especially in our community here, we have mostly smaller family-owned businesses employing our citizens and supporting our communities. And as home ownership gets property tax relief, this writer feels that some commercial property taxes might be rising, and how can we provide some relief? Again, in concern for the economy of the state. And a secondary question to be asked in that regard was, how will tax increases on the business sector help or assist in expanding the workforce? So it's kind of an interrelated issue there. And who would like to start? Senator? I can.
Sure. And I'll start off, and property taxes has become the most burdensome of the taxes for our businesses, and in this area of the state in particular, because they have gone up so much higher and faster in this area than anywhere else. So it is an issue that needs to be addressed, and one of the ways you address that is by generating the revenue we need for our services more at the state level rather than the local, because it's the locals that are raising their funds through property taxes. Of course, with the commercial property tax, we have the statewide commercial property tax, which I think also should be addressed, because I feel that it is a regressive tax. It tends to hit the lower and middle income people and smaller businesses the hardest, and that's one of the reasons that I really feel that we need to address this issue, and through more property tax relief offered at the state level. And there's a variety of ways that can be accomplished. One thing that's being done specifically for the Moorhead and the Dilworth area is we do have a disparities reduction credit, which we're going to be working on. I'm actually going to have a hearing on that in the tax committee on Monday. And what that does is that keeps our tax rate, somewhat comparable to what the North Dakota property tax rate is. And so we're working on that, trying to keep that going. There's other border cities legislation that's also being worked on, the enterprise zones, to help with existing businesses, and certainly we want to attract new businesses here as well and expand the businesses that we have. So property tax is a critically important issue, and I believe that the second part of the question was dealing with the was it incentives or?
Yes. How would tax increases either help or assist in expanding the workforce, I guess is the question.
Sure, and of course taxes are used for funding our education system, which is vitally important to creating a very productive workforce, and that's one of the reasons we've attracted a lot of businesses to Minnesota, is they do see the quality of our workforce, and so we need to continue workforce development through investment in our education system. And certainly those taxes are also important for building the infrastructure we need, the technological infrastructure and our transportation infrastructure, the roads and bridges that are so vitally important to our businesses in our communities here. And so all of these things are important, and I know there's always the issue about taxes, the negative impact that may have on businesses. We always have to be cognizant of that, especially next to North Dakota here, because they're such an anomaly in North Dakota, and that creates a real challenge for us here on the Minnesota side, especially in cities like Moorhead and Dilworth, where we're right here on the border, and so we have to. It doesn't take much, to discourage businesses or move them across the river. So that's why this border cities legislation is so critically important, to trying to shield some of our border communities. And just one word about North Dakota. We do a One Minnesota conference at the beginning of each legislative session. And at the beginning of it, they bring in experts, and they talk to legislators from both sides of the aisle, comparing us with other states. And this expert got up from the National Conference of State Legislatures, and the first thing he said was, don't compare yourself to North Dakota. Of all the states in the nation, don't compare yourself to North Dakota, because they are such an anomaly. They are bringing in so much oil money. They get so much federal money. They get more federal money per capita than any other state in the nation except Alaska. So they are flowing in revenue. And my response to that was, well, we have to compare ourselves to North Dakota. We don't have that option. So we have to always be aware of how whatever we do is affecting the businesses in those border communities.
Yes, Representative Lean.
Thank you. I campaigned on property taxes, and that is what I've continued to work on throughout session, is property taxes. As Senator Eakin had mentioned about the border cities bill, we're working on the House side at least, $1.5 million appropriation for that. Of that program, a lot of those dollars can be used by businesses or I should say can be used by the cities to help businesses with their property taxes, those border cities. And also with that disparity credit, also that Senator Eakin had mentioned, that's a program that I'm carrying on the House side as well. And what that bill would do is index the commercial industrial property taxes based on the neighboring city in North Dakota. So for example, we'd be taking a look at the rate for commercial industrial in Grand Forks and setting that for East Grand Forks, and then taking a look at the lowest rate on the Fargo side and setting that for Moorhead and Dilworth. So that's also something that I'm really working on. And also, I think we have to take a look at when the homestead credit was eliminated last year, we saw an overwhelming burden be placed on the businesses and the agricultural property across the state. And so with this new local government aid bill, what that's going to do is allow cities to better be able to meet their need. So those local government aid dollars are going to come in place between a city's levy and a city's unmet need, and that will significantly bring property taxes down across the board for everybody. And also something about the local government aid bill is that cities are going to much more be able better to plan what they're going to get year to year in that program. So they're going to be able to have a more reliable source of aid, which again will result in property tax reductions for everybody.
I'll start with the tax side first. I mean, property taxes are especially burdensome to businesses because regardless of how well you're doing, you have that fixed cost on the property taxes. And that's been huge. I mean, property taxes have gone up on properties and everyone else significantly in the last 10 years. Local government aid, I've always considered out in rural Minnesota probably the best economic tool that gets out there because it's one of the things that really, one of the few things that directly kind of benefits businesses because it allows cities and counties to keep their property taxes down but also their services up. And the disparity reduction credit bill that Representative Lean and Senator Eakin are carrying roughly would lower the effective rate by about 0.5%, which on a $200,000 valued business would be about $1,000 in property tax relief if we can get that through. So that's significant. On the spending side, to invest in education does cost money. And right now, probably a sure thing is what the governor has right now, which is a fourth tier income tax, which is a 2% tax on those who make over $250,000. That's probably going to be in the works. The governor has already taken off the table a $2.1 billion business-to-business tax, which folks around the state got to him very clearly, as did legislators. And to the governor's credit, he said, okay, I'm going to take that off the table. But he campaigned on the fourth tier, and that one, I think, is going to stay. So what are we going to get with that? Extra $2 on every $100 for those who make over $250,000. I am telling you that the goal of the education plan we're putting out is to get the world's best workforce by 2027. And if we do that, the economists have said that our unemployment rate would be 2% lower than it is now. That's 60,000 more jobs than we otherwise would have. The economist from the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis says our GDP would be 2.8% higher than it is right now, $8 billion of increased growth. So when you look at what Senator Eakin said, we're not going to compete with North Dakota on tax rates. Let's forget it. We're not going to do that. But where I will compete with any state in this union is the quality of life we offer here in Minnesota in terms of education and helping our most vulnerable, infrastructure, which helps our economy and helps businesses into the future. And that's where that extra $2 on the 100 will go. And I think it is money well spent that will help us many times over than what that $2 is going to cost.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. Do you think local government aid is going to come back to what we had before? Is that something that's going to happen? Or are we moving towards that?
Well, I think this new formula is much better than what we had in the past. For one, it has a built-in inflator measure so that the program will keep up with the cost that local governments have to pay to provide services for folks. And it's also going to keep up with the rate of growth for communities. Also, there's a provision, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, how cities are going to be able better to rely and predict what funding they're going to get. And that's based on last year's funding against this year's unmet need and making up that difference. So I think those two provisions alone will really help to avoid a lot of the unallotments and a lot of the cuts that we've seen over the last 10 years in this program, and really help that program be able to keep up with the rate of growth of communities.
And if I could just follow up, as far as the LGA, I think it's important to know why local government aid was brought into being is to make sure that communities in greater Minnesota, for instance, where we don't have as significant of a property tax base, that we have the resources to offer good quality services at an affordable price so that it doesn't matter where you live. And we are, after all, part of one state. We're not second-class citizens out here in rural Minnesota. We deserve to have the same, or at least decent quality services. We'll never have the same, because if you look at the metropolitan area, the level and the amount of services that they have far exceeds what we have out in the rural areas. But we should have basic, good quality services at an affordable price out here. That's the reason this statewide funding system was put into place, and we are the beneficiaries of it in Greater Minnesota. We receive far more back than we put into the state. That's one of the reasons that I would advocate more for raising the revenue at the state level through state taxes rather than the property tax, because the state taxes and the state funding is a much better deal for us. Again, we get back much more than we put in. And as far as property taxes, what we've seen is a cutback in that statewide funding system, shoving more and more of the burdens of funding our basic services onto the local units. It's why we see our property taxes going up higher and faster than anywhere else. This last year, we saw our property taxes on homes in Greater Minnesota go up 8 times faster than they did in the metro area. That's one of the reasons that we're trying to reverse that, bring back greater property tax relief for our area, a more equitable system that enables us to provide good quality services, again, at an affordable price. And most of the money that goes through the state, I think it's important to note too, the vast majority of it is pass-through dollars. Very little actually goes towards running the state. Most of that money is coming back into our roads and bridges, into our hospitals and schools, our nursing homes, our colleges and universities, and I don't know what the percent is. Do you know, Paul, the exact, as far as what actually goes to the state and what goes to out to others? But it's significant. It's a huge amount, and a lot of people don't realize that. Very little of that money that goes to St. Paul actually stays in St. Paul. That's going out, and more of it's coming out here than staying down there.
It's going to take a while to get to where we were with local government aid. Back in 2003, the certified amount was $587 million. Starting this year, we're down to $426 million. So, I mean, that's just to get back there. But I'll tell you what, again, and I've been a big proponent of local government aid, and even with a deficit, what Representative Lean has done here is not only been able to get $60 million of local government aid into his bill and into the property tax division report, but he was able, we have a whole new formula this year, and he was able and worked on a group that brought all of these city groups, you know, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the rural, the suburbs, whatever, together to come together on a common formula, which no one in St. Paul thought we could do. And he led that charge. And then the third thing that he's got in his local government aid bill that's in the property tax bill is an inflation, as he mentioned, which means even though we're at $486 right now in the House bill, we will be gaining 10 or 12 or $15 million a year, which is unbelievably if we can keep that in there. But so, I mean, what Representative Lean has done with that bill, I know that doesn't really get out there to folks, but for us insiders down in St. Paul, it's been amazing. And if we can continue to get that in there, it's going to have a huge benefit to our communities and around this area.
Thank you. Well, moving to a much larger national issue, if you will, that's all the way from the Supreme Court down to the state legislatures, is the issue of the freedom to marry, who you would like to marry. And so the questioners want to know what your views, Representative and Senators, are, and what do you think is the timeline when Minnesota might be ready to grant equal rights to all couples in the state?
Well, that certainly is a very emotional issue, and we're hearing a lot about that issue. First of all, what we have to do before we talk about any votes on gay marriage is get this budget done. That is the #1 priority. Balance the budget, make sure we have investments, property tax relief, education for our most vulnerable. That's #1. Whether or not a vote will come up this year, I don't know. Here's where I stand. Back 2 years ago, I voted against placing the one man, one woman into the Constitution. I voted against that. And the reason I voted against that is because I thought it was huge, big government intrusion into our personal lives and liberties, and I couldn't support that. I do think gay marriage is a separate issue, and I haven't decided how I'm going to vote on that one. Like I said, quite frankly, I'm more focused on putting the education bill out here on Tuesday. You know, I don't know. I think that's a tough decision for a lot of legislators. I'm wrestling with that. And I do think probably we will end up taking a vote yet this year. But you know, we've got to get the budget done first. And It's a huge issue. Supreme Court is dealing, they'll be coming out with a decision probably by about June, late June, which may or may not impact what we would do in Minnesota.
Okay, Senator?
Yeah, and I too, think we need to focus on getting the budget done first. I do believe that there'll be time once the budget bills are off the floor, and we have the budget bills they're going to be out of committee by April 19th. So just a couple more weeks, and we'll be done with all the major budget bills. But that's job number one, and that's the basic job that we need to get done. As far as the issue itself, that's one of the reasons there was a vote that took place on the Senate floor that I think there was some misunderstanding about the meaning of the vote. There was a motion that was made to adopt a committee report for the gay marriage bill, and I did oppose bringing it to the floor or adopting it. That just simply would have kept it in committee. And I believe that all of those bills should stay in committee until after we get the budget bills off the floor of the House and the Senate and into conference committee. Then we can pick up with those bills. I feel the same way about the gun bills that are coming forward. And by the way, they've made a decision that they're not even going to try to bring those to the floor now. They're just going to, and they're going to keep those bills. The gay marriage equality, the Freedom to Marry bill, is sitting on the floor of the Senate right now. The motion to adopt did pass, but I believe the leadership has decided that we're going to wait until we get the budget bill done before we move forward on any other bills, because that's the basic job we need to complete. And as I said earlier, those finance committees are meeting around the clock now. We're meeting into the evenings until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, in some cases even later yet. And it's going to get later as we go into the final couple weeks here of finalizing these budget bills. So our focus is really on those issues at this point. I do think it's important to note that I do believe that we should not be denying rights and benefits to those same-sex couples in our society and in our communities. I have not yet taken a position on the Freedom to Marry bill itself. But I do believe that we need to, at the very least, be ensuring that the same rights and privileges and benefits that are accorded to married couples are also provided for the same-sex couples. So, and I did oppose the constitutional amendment last year that passed, in the legislature passed out and onto the ballot. Actually, it was 2 years ago that they passed it. They were doing that during the budget debate, and I think it's important to note that the leadership of the last legislature didn't get a budget done in time, and we ended up with a state shutdown. And I do think that we need to focus on making sure we get our basic job done first. But I did oppose putting that constitutional amendment on the ballot. I didn't feel that was appropriate. I didn't feel that was right. So I did oppose that amendment.
Well, I certainly would like to say I do appreciate leadership on the House and Senate saying, we got here campaigning on property taxes, education, getting the budget under control, and that's what we, at least on the House side, I can't exactly speak for the Senate, but that's what we've been focusing on throughout the session, and I really commend leadership. I know a lot of folks, when DFL got total control, a lot of folks were saying, okay, this is our time to go out there and do some really big things on gay marriage and on guns and some of these more social issues. And I think it really did take leadership to say, that's not what we campaigned on. What we campaigned on was getting the state budget under control, getting some of these property tax, these education issues under control. And I really commend leadership for keeping the focus on that ball. With that being said, the gay marriage bill, it was moved out of the Civil Law Committee, and it is on the General Register now. So the next step would be the House floor. Again, leadership has said, we're going to take care of the budget first. Representative Tim Kelly introduced a civil union bill, so I'm sure that will get some debate and some discussion. I was on with Joel Heitkamp a couple of weeks ago, and he had asked me this on the air, and I said, Joel, throughout the whole campaign, I was very clear that I have friends, I have family who are part of the LGBT community, and personally, I can't turn my back on these folks, and now that I'm in this position politically, I can't turn my back on these folks. So I don't know exactly what form of the bill will come out. If it will come out, that I don't know either, but when it does come out, it is something I will support as a matter of principle to these people who are in my life.
Thank you. We've come around about an hour and a half now, and I think probably we need to wind things up. We certainly thank you, our senator and representatives, for your time with us, and for you, the audience, for your very thoughtful questions, and for your attendance here on this kind of dreary day. Spring is coming, I think, but let's all keep hoping. So I think we'll wind things up now with just a couple of minutes from each of our panel to mention their closing arguments here, closing comments. Would you like to start over? Ben, would you like to start this time?
Sure. Thank you again for moderating today, Frank, and thank all of you for coming out. As we race to the finish line here, the final 6 or 7 weeks, it's going to be some real marathon floor debates. I know in the next couple of weeks we're going to be taking a look at all the omnibus bills that have been passed out of committee and having final floor debates on those. We have moved the property tax division report out of that division onto the full tax committee. The Judiciary Committee, I anticipate, will be taking a vote on that final omnibus bill Wednesday. I think Chair Pulowski would continue to have hearings on the House Higher Ed Committee until probably October. So we do have to meet a deadline there. I anticipate we'll be taking that right up to the deadline. Like I say, we've been really digging in deep, very detailed on the MnSCU, on the University of Minnesota budgets, and along with that I anticipate will come significant tuition relief for students. So we're going to be kind of grinding it out here with some real long floor sessions coming up, and I certainly appreciate all the comments and questions I've been getting from folks, and please continue to let me know how people feel on certain issues as they come up.
Representative Marquardt, you want to follow?
Yes, well, thank you again, Frank, and thank you all for coming out. And, I really enjoy being a legislator and representing folks. And I first got involved in all this was to help people. And I say that because there are so many issues that you just heard here today that there is no black and white, even though there's a lot of emails I get that it's black and white, but it's not black and white. And you have to weigh things against one another. And I know I'm not unlike any of the other 200 legislators, Republicans or Democrats alike, who are trying to do best for their constituents and how they think they will help their constituents the best. And ultimately, that's what we have to decide. But what's really important is that I'm always on my email. I'm around. We welcome your comments. We still have 6 weeks to go. And there is nothing more valuable than a personal comment from someone back home. That's worth all of the lobbyists that stop by your door and everything else, when you can get a personal note or a comment from someone on how something that's happening is impacting that person. Because we deal with these spreadsheets and we've got numbers and bills with words on it, but we don't have faces and we don't have emotions and we don't have people on there that we know those bills are impacting. And so please, and I know we've got some great advocates in the crowd here that we've talked to, but all the legislators are trying to do what's best, try to make it best for improved quality of life in our community, and we welcome, and I welcome any help and comments that we can get. And thanks for coming out here, and we're gonna, no matter what happens, we're gonna keep this a great state and into the future.
Senator Egan.
Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank everyone again for attending today. And again, it's some pretty important issues that we're grappling with right now. And I want to say that it's really such a privilege and honor to be serving with Representative Lean and Marquardt, and outstanding representatives. And we're a real team, and I think that's important. We need teams in St. Paul advocating and fighting for our concerns, and we'll continue working together to make sure that our concerns are being addressed and being heard. I'm going to end with, I guess, one of the issue that I started off with again, because I think it is so important, and that is, again, the funding for long-term care in particular, because I have some real concerns there. And there was a legislator, a former legislator, who during those austere times of the last 10 years when we saw the budgets at the state shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, he said that it was like a water hole, and that as the water hole dries up, the animals around it start to look at each other in different ways. And we've seen that happening over the last 10 years, a lot of equally worthy causes fighting against each other. And by the way, I pointed out to him that I didn't think that the water hole was drying up, it was being drained, and that we needed to stop people from draining it. But the fact is that now we have an opportunity to make sure that the water hole is big enough to ensure that we can educate our children and take care of our seniors, take care of those with disabilities, and fix our roads and bridges. We can do it. And I think it's a false choice to say that we don't have enough to do all of those things. You're going to have to choose. Are you going to take care of your seniors, or are you going to take care of people with disabilities? Are we going to educate our children, or are we going to fix our roads and bridges? No, those are false choices. And I don't want to see equally worthy causes being pitted against each other here. Our job, in my view, is to make sure that water hole is big enough so that we can provide all of these very important services and make sure that we have a quality of life in Minnesota that is second to none. And that requires some investments be made. And certainly, you know, the point was made earlier, you know, we're not going to get there just by throwing money at things. We need to make sure we're doing things efficiently. And in the area of health and human services, we are looking at that, trying to find the most efficient, most effective ways of doing that. And one of the reasons we need to do that, as well as find more funding, is because of the age wave that's coming. The baby boomers, they're retiring at unprecedented rates. We're facing a situation that we've never seen in the history of the world as far as the number of people that are now entering retirement years. Many of them are going to be needing long-term care services. And so if we don't get out in front of this age wave, it's going to swamp us. And it's going to consume all the resources we need for everything else. For education, roads and bridges, what have you, it's going to consume all of those resources. So we need to make some investments now, and it's why, and some people don't want to talk about it, I think, because it's such a daunting task. You know, you look out there and you see this age wave coming, and some people just prefer to ignore it and pretend it's not there. But we do that at our own detriment, and so we need to focus the spotlight on those issues, address them now. We'll be better off for it in the future. It'll help everybody in our state if we do so. So again, just wanted to emphasize that point. So again, thank you for everything.
Well, thank you. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Red River Valley, we thank our panel and thank our constituent audience here today. And I think we should give our panel a hand. Thank you for coming.